Jim Farrell, Mayor of Federal Way. It's great to have everybody here. We're really excited to have the Highline Forum here. We're going to have a great conversation. I do want to let you know that we're equipped in this room. Actually, we probably need to figure out what that background, there's a noise with the microphones. We probably need to figure out what's going on. But I do want to let you know that we are taping this for recording to make sure it gets out on Channel 21, which is the television station here in Federal Way, and we'll make sure that gets rebroadcast. So we are going to make sure that gets out in the community. Also, we'll have an opportunity as the host city to talk about what great things that we're doing in Federal Way in regard to economic development and some of the things we're doing in regard to airport interaction as well. So welcome, and enjoy. I hope you enjoy your stay here in Federal Way. Make sure to, on your way after the meeting, stop at a Federal Way restaurant and enjoy yourself as well. So welcome.
All right, I'm being wired for sound. I must say I should have brought my guitar or something, but I guess because we are... I would like to start off by introducing our new executive director, Steve Metruck. I was going to introduce him as Vice Admiral Steve Metruck, and he hates that. In fact, we are very fortunate to have somebody with his broad experience as a Coast Guard public servant for many years. Actually, I had the pleasure of knowing him back when he was here, Captain of the Port in 2008, and he's gone on to much greater things as managing the Coast Guard's national budget, and so he's dealt with large organizations, commander of the Mid-Atlantic region, some 3,600 personnel, and as CFO of the Coast Guard, it was just a $10 billion budget. So more than well qualified to be here, but most importantly is his ethical and civic engagement that you will see written all over him. He hates me bragging about his criteria, his credential, but in fact, his greatest credential is who he is as a person, and I'm sure once you get to know him, you'll see what I'm talking about. So, Steve, if you would go from here.
Thanks, Commissioner. And it's great to be here. I think the one thing, and of course, Commissioner Calkins was just showing me this picture, and you think this picture is bad. You should see the ones I turned down. You know that this is the. And anyway, so it's a real honor to be here, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for hosting us. It's really a great honor for me to be here, especially on I'm in day 56, I think, of my time with the port, and we've already met with many of the mayors in the surrounding area. And this is great to be here at the Highline Forum. I just want to say a couple things about myself, and one of the things is that how excited I am here to be here back in the Pacific Northwest. I've traveled all around, but this is one of the few places that my wife and I thought that we could go back to. And I was excited about that, but I was more excited about the opportunity to come and work at the Port of Seattle because it's a public entity. It's good to be back in the public sector after working 34 years in the public realm to do that. But to come back and be able to work for an organization whose values align with mine, which include economic return for the organization, but also balancing that with environmental and human health balances, and then spreading prosperity. So those are the things that aligning with the organization and with the commission as we go forward, that I'm really excited about doing that. And really, it's always been the hallmark of my career is to interact with lots of different stakeholders and partners and communities. Worked in, I've done 17 different moves with the Coast Guard, and each time is trying to establish those close relationships, because I know it's the relationships with the community, with the organizations of those communities that gets things done. So anyways, it's an honor to be back here. Saw a lot of familiar faces when I arrived here in Seattle, and I'm looking forward to meeting more and getting to know people here. So thank you, Commissioner.
And Steve will have to be leaving us a little early today, so take no umbrage. We know where to find him. And like I said, he's quite the approachable guy. And before we get into public comment, we're going to have to do the election of the co-chair. And at some point, we should all introduce ourselves, I would think is probably maybe even prior to electing a co-chair, we should know who our current members are. So, as I said, Port of Seattle Commissioner Fred Felleman. I guess. But I don't need a mic, right?
Ryan Calkins, Port of Seattle Commissioner.
Steve Metruck, Port of Seattle.
Jim Farrell, Mayor of Federal Way.
He gets two.
And Weidenfeld, Senior Policy Advisor to Mayor Farrell.
Lydia Safa-Dawson, City of Federal Way Council.
Michael Mathias, City Manager of Des Moines.
Mark Hoppins, City Manager, Normandy Park.
Michelle Stipes Marvin, Normandy Park City Council.
So I'm not a Highline Forum member. I'm Edmund Cito, University of Washington. I'm one of the presenters today.
Tim Larson from the University of Washington.
Nancy Tosta, Burien City Council.
Lisa Scari, Highline College.
Joe Scorcio, I'm the city manager at Sea-Tac.
Michael Siefkes, Mayor of the City of Sea-Tac.
Claire Gallagher with the Port of Seattle, based at Sea-Tac Airport.
Very good. And so I would entertain, well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that Kathy Hogarty has served as co-chair for some 3 terms, I'm told, predating me. And although she's not in attendance, I hope we can recognize that extra level of service maybe at the next meeting. But at this time, I would like to call for the question. Does anybody want to put themselves forward or nominate a new co-chair? Mr. Sifkis. No, you have to just screen.
Sure. Is it on?
I think there's a little switch on the top. There you go.
Right. I'm actually putting my own name out there. I've talked to different cities and talked to Kathy, and she said she'd be fine if I took over for chair, but there might be other people that are interested.
Well, since Kathy didn't show, we could always just, nominate her just because she's not here. But I really appreciate Michael for stepping up. Thank you. And do we have anybody else?
I'd like to nominate Kathy.
I think she has did not want to. I was being a little humorous about that. But
Mayor, you talked to Councilman Hogarty, and she said she would not plan to run again.
that's right. I was being facetious. That it's always, if you don't show up, you get elected to something you didn't want to be. She specifically said she did not want to run, so pardon that. But would you like to say something about your? I see. We can call the vote. All those in favor?
So each forum entity gets 1 vote.
Okay, but not the port. Right. And so unless we have any other nominations at this time, all those in favor of Mr. Sifkis serving as co-chair of the Highline Forum?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. So an acceptance speech, thank you.
Well, let's see. I left my 6-page speech at home, but I've got the 30-second speech. I've been the member of the Highline Forum for a couple years, and I appreciate the opportunity it gives everybody to talk to other cities and to the port and Highline Community College and Highline School District. It seems like it's picked up steam over the past couple of years. Originally, I think it was a little unfocused, but as the last couple of years have come on, the airport and port issues have kind of started to become more of a focal point. We work closely with the port and Sea-Tac, and believe we have a good relationship. So I'm glad, and if anybody has any specific issues that they want us to address at future meetings, that's something that Commissioner Felleman and I will discuss together, and I'm open to any suggestions and just here to help. Thanks.
Seems only appropriate with all that's going on this year and in the near future that we would have Mayor of Sea-Tac as our co-chair. So thank you very much, and I look forward to trying to carry out these responsibilities as well. And so we now, one of my more favorite opportunities is to give the public a chance to tell us a thing or two. We have a handful of folks and like to be able to limit it to 2 minutes. I will entertain the ability to have a few questions after our presentation from the UW folks, because I know that always inspires some information, some questions that we wouldn't have the benefit of beforehand. But where would be the persons over here, right at the podium? So the first person up is Kent Pasolari. Palasari. I should know by now, right? Sorry, Kent.
Hello, everyone. I just
wanted to kind of put a face to the study that's going to be presented later. As far as the importance of finding out the effects that nanoparticles have on human health, I live about a half mile from Sea-Tac on McMicken Heights, and found out, well, actually a couple months ago, that I'm going to be a father again. This study is vitally important to me personally. It's actually kind of a life and death study for me. I need to stay alive long enough to see my children graduate from high school. I'll be 72 when this most recent child graduates from high school. I want to make sure that I'm alive to see that. My respiratory issues are ridiculous. I get bronchitis probably every 2 months. I can't play with my child the way I want to, and anybody who knows me knows I love my child, and I love playing with her, and I love being with her. I love having the energy to be a father. There's nothing greater in my life than being a father. We need answers to this. To be honest, in some ways I don't want to know the truth because I'm afraid of what it will mean. But we need to know the effects that this has on communities. We need to have the answers so that we can take whatever steps we need to do to offset what might be going on. So I really appreciate the effort that's being done with this study and the fact that there's so many people in this room that are supporting it. And I just want to thank you for all of your effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. Dana Holloway.
Hi. I'm Dana Holloway. I've lived in Federal Way for 42 years. The vision of the future expansion of Sea-Tac Airport to increase commercial and cargo flights is unrealistic. It does not take into account the impact to local communities. The current flight capacity for commercial and cargo flights is having major impacts on local communities and residents. I have lived in my current house in Southwest Federal Way for the last 31 years. I seldom heard or saw an airplane. However, that drastically has increased over the past several years to the point is impacting our quality of life and the health of many people, including children. I used to be able to sit outside and listen to the owls at night. Seriously, I could actually hear the owls. Now, the exception is when we're not bombarded by airplane noise day and night. Often the flights are lined up one after another, nose to tail. I did not buy a house next to the airport. We were never in the flight path. That is until you decided to increase airport capacity to increase profits for the port, the airport, and the airlines, at the detriment to residents, businesses, and communities. We have had enough. That is why I'm here giving a public comment. You, the people in this room, have the ability to stop the madness and affront by the decisions you make. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I just want to make sure you understand that this certainly isn't a profit-making situation for the Port of Seattle, but it is responding to the economic situation of the region. But we hear very much the impacts on the community, so thank you for your comments. Roger Rader?
Thank you. Roger Kadig, City of Sea-Tac resident for over 60 years. My professional life, I spent almost 30 years as an environmental consultant, and my specialty was environmental chemistry. That's important to my comment. I really encourage and am pleased to see the work that's being done by the university in the nanoparticle study. Very, very important. But you actually have only one leg of a three-legged stool. There's two other components that you will need in addition to this study to answer the questions you're trying to answer. You need, in addition to this work, you need a thorough review of the toxicology literature and probably sponsor some toxicology studies. That's because just having the data, you still have to figure out, okay, are these particles toxic or not, and how toxic? So you've got another question you have to answer. The other leg of the stool that you need is you need a risk assessment because you still need to assess the exposure pathways. In other words, you may have the particles, they may be toxic, but what are the pathways to the human? And you need two types of studies. You need both an ecological risk assessment, what it's doing to the flora and the fauna, as well as a human health toxicology and risk assessment evaluation. So be thinking about this. You need to be thinking ahead because you're going to get data here and then you're going to have everybody in the public just trying to interpret it, and you need professionals to interpret it. So you're still going to need a toxicology study and a risk assessment study to parallel along with this to answer the questions you're really after. So that's just my suggestion. You may want to be thinking about this right now. Do you want to get some consultants on board, or however you want to approach it? But when this data comes in, you're going to have it interpreted to answer the questions that have already been raised. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name, Katig. And I mean, again, I'm not great with names, but I certainly have appreciated your long-term input here. All right, for our next speaker, and by the way, you know, when we say environment, we talk about the human environment, the natural environment, the built environment, and so an environmental impact statement is not just about the critters, and you should understand that we embrace that fully. So Debbie Wagner, come on down.
Hi, I'm Debbie Wagner from Burien. I had sat on this Highline Forum for a while and came to these meetings for over a decade. So anyway, I'm extra bored compared to the rest of you. Anyway, I just want to say I'm here to stand up for the community, for information, for facts and data. So we've always been missing facts and data. I've been tracking studies that have been done around the air pollution issues at Sea-Tac since 1970. So these studies each say we need more studies. We need more studies. 91, we need more studies. 93, we need more studies. So the information that I've seen indicates there's a huge public health risk. And that isn't the end of the story. There's a huge risk. There's exposure, and we also have documented negative health outcomes from the State Department of Public Health Epidemiology, who researched the area and looked closely at the zip codes on behalf of my request and others. And this showed that we have a statistically significantly higher rate of asthma in at least one zip code. We have higher cancer rates. In the 90s, we had higher death rates. We had higher deaths from disease rates. We had lower life expectancy, and we had significantly enough cancer cases in our community to warrant further studies, which have not been done. So my question has always been, is it safe to live here? Where is it safe to live at? What are potential mitigations? What's the extent of the impact? And we need to know. And that's a question I've been asking for 25 years. Is it safe to live here? And where are those areas? That has never been identified. Now we have an opportunity to learn a little bit, but that still doesn't negate the fact that we're in a toxic poison circle, and 100,000 people are being toxic crop dusted every day by overhead aircraft. It's a time to roll back the expansionist agenda, roll it back to what you learn is a safe level, and then proceed carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Mary Mukhtar? Next up would be J.C. Harris.
I'm really nervous, but I've called the Sea-Tac so many times, they probably wonder why I'm nervous. I live in Auburn, West Hill, and it's probably not a very well-known spot because Auburn is so spread with the West Hill and the Valley and the East Hill. I live at 5847 South 325th Court, Auburn, West Hill. And previous to that, this past July, we moved from across the street from Thomas Jefferson High School, where I taught for 22 years, and some of the other schools as well. I'm a high school teacher. I do have an environmental science degree, but that's not necessarily something to brag about because people think that you're, more concerned about the birds than you are about economics. I'm not. Economics is very, very important. Just to say that when we moved here 23 years ago almost, so 22 years across the street from Thomas Jefferson High School, we watched right out in front is, I didn't know what it's called, but I found out it's called a main corridor. Depending on the weather and airflow, which I guess is most predominant, flying south for getting aloft, and watched the traffic get so tremendous that we wanted to move, and I spent a good part of about 5 years looking for a safe place, a quieter place to live. Did a lot of research, went on the ground, but unfortunately I didn't go at the right times of the day. And as it turns out, we moved directly under, it's a cosmic joke, the main flight corridor for east flights. And we moved there on the 5th of July. And on the 5th of July, 6th and 7th, daily I was counting between 400 and 500 planes overhead. The thing of it is, the planes were not higher up in the sky. They were actually coming around the corner of our street, concentrated on our street, 325th Court, and they were going into their acceleration and ascent like a takeoff strip. So I checked with the city of Auburn, and they said they're not responsible for the permitting for the homes. It's a Sea-Tac problem. It's a mobile problem. I understand that. So I've been begging and asking if they could just get the planes higher up in the air. Why should it take them 13 to 15 miles traveling southeast to get to our 325th Court and do their acceleration and their ascent? I'm not going to get into all the noise and the number of planes, and I did studies because I'm an academic, and that's the only thing I could do to kind of cope with this thing and calling people. But I just got a letter today from a Kathy, to make sure I have her, Karen Kalanick, and I was dealing with a Michael Carroll. And it looks to me like they've fanned the planes out more, so they're more dispersed. But the planes, 400 to 500 planes a day directly overhead, and I'm not going to get into my disabilities, but they certainly have made them worse. I hope I've been to different cities. They've decentralized the airports like New York and Washington, D.C. and Chicago. I think that's something that has to be done, decentralizing and dispersing the aircraft so they can do their job and go where they need to go, and the economy won't be affected.
Mary.
But I don't want to. I'd like to live a long life, and I do have problems, and I think at least we know where West Hill, Auburn is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And the question about a regional airport study is very much part of the discussion right now for the PSRC. So that capacity is something we're looking at. All right, so next up, JC. And just so you know, Mayor Sifkias is going to have to run out after the public comment to meet with the governor. So I think we can excuse him for that, although he gets his nomination and runs. But we'll let him off the hook this time, as long as it's for a higher purpose. All right, JC, thank you.
I guess I would like to say that going back to 1997, the people who sued the port were not idiots. They were not feckless or irresponsible. The cities that sued knew what they were on about, right? building the third runway they thought was a clear and present danger to health, to the safety of the communities. And since then, everyone has kind of, it's sort of like, you know, you have a problem in your marriage, and then you kind of go, okay, well, we got past that. But the airport was at capacity in 1997, and when they started working on the third runway. It was already dangerous then. So you can have all of the studies you want, and you can granulate the problems in various categories and create taxonomies of dangers. But it was already over the top when they laid the tarmac for the third runway. So I don't need any more specific information, even though I'm a licensed professional engineer and I can read the stuff and I appreciate all that information. I already knew it was bad. And I guess where I'm at now is I'm like, when are we going to get to the tough part? You have these very pleasant chats year in and year out where the cities and the port have these get-togethers, but at some point you're going to have to, like with marriage counseling, you're going to have to get to the hard part. Okay? The port is going to have to do real things to reduce the pollution, and it's not going to be sustainable fuels. It's going to have to be curfews, okay? And that's the easy one. It's going to have to be a thing like a curfew, where you stop those nasty old 747s with the engines that spin and deposit trace amounts of beryllium and gadolinium, which are not good, okay, onto people in vivo.
JC, thank you. You know the jurisdiction of airports for flights, things like that, and it is unfortunately not a passing of the buck, but an FAA issue. However, we will continue to explore our abilities to minimize our impacts. Margaret Nelson, please, and the next up would be nobody. You don't get a second bite at the apple. Okay, Margaret.
Hello, my name is Margaret Nelson. I live less than a mile from here. I'm pleased to see commissioners from the port because I've never been able to talk to any of you personally. We've lived here for over 30 years. We have noticed a definite, annoying increase in the number of flights, in the times that they're taking off at night, and in the decibel level of the flights. I am listening to you here, and I am concerned that you do not put a limit on the hours of planes coming in and out of Sea-Tac, as I understand other airports do. I think it'd be a dandy idea. I'm interested in what the other people have said. And I'm also concerned that no matter how well-meaning you are, who is going to get this information that will actually make the decision to make the changes that we residents deserve? I know an engineer. He said, well, shouldn't have bought a house underneath a flight plan. As the other fellow said, there was no runway when we bought our house. And it seems like Federal Way and several of the other communities are right in a existing flight plan that has been maintained rather than spread the pain out around the entire area. I invite you to come to my house. You can spend the night, because I'd like it, because I know what time you're going to wake up. So thank you very much for coming, and good luck to us all.
Thank you very much. We've done some homework on the airports that have night hours and things like that. They are small airports, and it's something that we've at least been looking at. Anyway, moving forward, I believe we have the welcoming to our community, and we'll say goodbye to Mayor Sifkis. But at this point, let's learn a little bit about Federal Way and have Mayor Farrell give us a tour.
Thank you, Commissioner. So One of the things, we're very cognizant of your time. We have, it's my understanding that whenever you come into a community, you want to hear a little bit about it. So I'm going to talk somewhat about what we're doing in our downtown and economic development, but I'm going to rather quickly get into the efforts that we have undertaken with regard to air traffic. I too join my neighbors in saying thank you for the commissioners coming. It's great to see the Highline Forum here. And this is certainly something I think is very important moving forward, this kind of engagement. One of the things, just to talk very briefly about, is what we've tried to do in Federal Way, recognizing our unique geographical location on I-5, and we'll talk about the economic development aspect. But Federal Way has gone through, just in the past few years, some revitalization of our downtown core. That's included, if you have an opportunity, and I invited you to go around the community when you get done, if you haven't spent much time in Federal Way lately. This is a picture right here of our beautiful Town Square Park, where the used to be sitting on what we used to refer to as the AMC movie theater site, which was 4 years, a brief 4 years ago, was essentially a cyclone fenced abandoned property with essentially a pile of rubble. Now it's a 4-acre, beautiful park paid for with REIT, or real estate excise tax money, that had been sitting in account literally for 10 years, and now it's a destination for our community. It's just an absolute gem in the heart of our downtown. Then, we had been debating and discussing a performing arts and event center for probably about 2 decades, and we were able to bring together a blue ribbon panel to give us some advice on how to move forward. The council did unanimously move forward, and boy, I can't believe that's been 4 years now. And just last year, that's the picture right there of the ribbon cutting, and that little boy right to the left of me is my son Benjamin, who I think I'm raising him to think he's going to get to cut every ribbon indefinitely in the community. So he was eager to cut that ribbon, as we all were, and now we've got a beautiful performing arts and event center that is 80% paid off in regard to. It was a $32.5 million facility, and we've raised over $25 million for the capital expenses. And so that picture to the right is the State of the City address, where we had well over 650 people, about 640 people there for the State of the City address, and it was great to see everybody there. We've got performances coming up. I can't help but to talk about what's going on in our community. We've got Cinderella starting on April 28th, American Music, a soulful celebration, starting on May 18th, the 57th Harmony King Show starting on May 19th, and the Ambiguous Dance Company, I have no idea what that means, starting on June 8th. So I really invite you to come. We really believe that the Performing Arts and Events Center is going to be a regional draw, and please tell your friends about it, and it's a great opportunity. One of the things we're also doing is revitalizing our downtown core, and right next to the Performing Arts and Event Center is will be a beautiful hotel right next to that, and then we're going to have, we have actually engaged in a historic partnership with the University of Washington Tacoma, Highline Public Schools. Actually, Lisa Scari is with us today with Highline and Federal Way Public Schools, and we have a memorandum of understanding that we signed in January of last year to bring a higher educational presence. Importantly, Highline's a great partner, and then bringing UW Tacoma for this university initiative that will really focus on both traditional students but also non-traditional students, and what's referred to as that 2+2 model. So that's something that's going to happen right in that downtown area. We're working right now. What's the next thing that's going to happen in our downtown is the downtown staircase. It's going to essentially connect Town Square Park and that parking garage to the Performing Arts and Events Center, the hotel, and that area where UW Federal Way will eventually be, and also the mixed-use development where the former Target was. Our downtown essentially was 21 acres of abandoned, blighted downtown, and that story is changing. That staircase is paid for with nearly, I think it's 97% of outside grants from state money, county money, and real estate excise tax money. It's really going to connect the properties together. We've got, obviously, the Federal Way Transit Center that is just within just a few feet of our Town Square Park, and then we've got light rail now coming as a result of ST3, which will again further revitalize our downtown. So in regard to economic development, we've done a lot in regard to for the first time in our city's 28-year history, our first economic development strategy and some assembly required. We brought on Tim Johnson for economic development strategy, and we've been recruiting businesses from Cogent to Campion Market, 85 degrees Celsius. DaVita actually is going to be essentially doubling or near tripling their presence in the city of Federal Way with 1,000 new employees with a brand new building right next to where they're at, and that's actually on the property formerly known as the Weyerhaeuser property, and now with the IRG. We've got London Aviation Underwriters, Diagnose Tech, doing some cutting edge science as well. So there's a lot going on in regard to economic development. The former Weyerhaeuser campus, as you all know, it's just a beautiful, iconic location. Just north of this location, where the historic headquarters is, that's where, along North Lake, is where the DaVita building is going to be. We've been working very closely with not only IRG, but also the folks that live in that immediate area. And there's just probably been what I would refer to as a historic coalition of individuals in that area that live right around the North Lake area and around the Weyerhaeuser property to really talk about their visioning and their environmental concerns. And I'm really proud of the efforts that we've made. And one of the things is we brought in Forterra to really work hand in hand with the Save Weyerhaeuser Campus group. That's the name of their group. Just a really historic level of outreach and communication with not only the council, but the community and the region at large about their vision, what they would hope. So there are all kinds of things and ideas, but we were actually very fortunate in this last legislative session to get $750,000 total monies dedicated toward Forterra and conservation efforts with the IRG, now the IRG property. We're really trying to save that pristine wooded area west of North Lake, and with an eye toward making sure that the 432 acres are really used responsibly, and that they're going to be well used in the community, and with an eye toward the future. So we actually put aside $1 million in surface water management. We were able to get another $1 million thanks to the help of our King County Councilman, Pete von Reichbauer. And actually, with the monies that we've been able to accumulate, we think we're going to, within a year or two, have essentially $4 million. And again, that's to accumulate and help the Save Weyerhaeuser campus purchase that property west of North Lake, which is just north of this area. And again, preservation efforts are ongoing. We've got the rhododendron garden and the botanical garden and the bonsai museum. Both are historic and nationally and internationally known amenities for our community and our region, and they are also on that. And I think that's one of the things that Forterra is really attempting to market to make sure that we preserve a lot of this property. All right, now it was a big part of our legislative agenda. Our legislative delegation, especially Representative Policiotti, were able to help us accumulate that money. You could see there the $250,000 and the $500,000 that passed for a total of $750,000 for conservation efforts. It's one of the real iconic areas and campuses in the Pacific Northwest, and it's something that has certainly captured the attention and certainly the people in that area and our city government is committed to making sure that we preserve absolutely as much of that property as we can. All right, so now let's move on to the relevant. I wanted to give you a background of what we're doing, but airport and air traffic. So obviously, the port is a huge partner in regard to key economic driver. When I've been doing, with the help of Tim Johnson, our economic development director, when I've gone down to certain business trips to recruit businesses to this community, one of the things I do as a selling point is I talk to those businesses and those entities about how close we are to the airport in regard to, and where we're at in between those two ports, the Seattle and Tacoma ports, and about those transportation hubs in order to bring people and businesses to our area. Obviously, it connects us internationally, and we've been able to capture $65,000 in the last 2 years for economic development and partnership grants. In response to what we've been hearing and what I've been hearing very, very clearly as the mayor of this community, and I'm actually a neighbor of Margaret's. Margaret and I live literally right around the corner from each other. I hear it too, and we have heard a distinct difference in regard to frequency and volume, and that's one of the principal reasons why I initiated the Quiet and Healthy Skies Task Force. We've got several members of the task force present today, and their report is due shortly in regard to recommendations, and they have been hard at work. Additionally, I went to the Puget Sound Regional Council and made a presentation or gave remarks there regarding a study that they're commissioning as well. And really, one of the things that we felt that was missing was a discussion, two things that we felt that were not in the scope of that study that the FAA had asked. And the first was capacity. Essentially, what is the upper limit of, and I think that was referenced before, what do we think the ceiling is, if you will, of the airport? And at some point, based on the size of the property, there must be some sort of acknowledgement that there is a cap at some point. And the second issue, in addition to capacity, is really the effect that airport growth will have on the neighboring communities. And Josh Brown, the executive director of PSRC, the very next week came to my office, met with myself and Yarden, Yarden just does tremendous work as our senior policy advisor. And those two items were added into the scoping of that study, and I was very happy to hear about that. We've got some legislative efforts with the federal. The former chair of our Quiet and Healthy Skies Task Force, John Reesing, is in the room today. He and I actually met with Congressman Adam Smith, and we were able to convince Congressman Smith, it was mainly John, was able to convince him to develop a piece of legislation in regard to a particulate study and really taking a look at those ultrafine particles and the effect that they have. And then Representative Policiotti dropped a bill in regard to inclusion of Federal Way and dropping and broadening broadening the area to include Federal Way, and that made some progress this year, but it did not get through, and we're hopeful that that will advance next year. And we also were successful in joining our neighbors, many of which are here in the room today, in regard to a budget proviso which did pass for that study, and Federal Way did speak out in favor of that. John Reesing and myself and Yarden and several other members of the task force here in Federal Way met with the Air Force Wing, the leadership of McCord, Joint Base Lewis McCord, focus on the Air Force personnel, and we talked to them and communicated with them about our concerns about military aircraft in Federal Way. So those are some of the efforts. We're looking forward to truly engaging on this subject and making sure that we are good advocates for our community and then making sure that we keep up the lines of communication. I've got some summer events, but I think I've done enough of a promotion for Federal Way today. We've got some, I'll just leave those up for just a moment. We've got some great things happening in Federal Way. But I do want to say, just to go into this topic, in just taking a step back, I do appreciate the commissioners. Prior to this meeting, we had an opportunity, myself and Yarden had a chance to sit down with the commissioners and with the commission staff and really talk about making sure that the lines of communication are open. I think that's absolutely essential, and that we look for ways and really try to look around the corners and think about the quality of life. I think ultimately this issue comes down to a quality of life issue for our residents and making sure that people whose probably their number one investment in their life is their home, and making sure that when the weather gets nice and they want to enjoy their home and enjoy their family, that they're able to do so in a manner that they don't have to shut their windows and shut their doors, and that they can stay in Federal Way. So on that, I've got questions here, but I think we've got the rest of the meeting to attend to, but I just want to say thank you once again for coming to Federal Way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Farrell. You can leave the tickets for the evening events by the door. I think we have our executive director has another meeting, as does Ryan Calkins, our co-chair. But We're still got a quorum, so don't nobody leave yet, because in fact this is the time we've all been waiting for. And I think in relation to JC's comments about marriage counseling, I think before you get a divorce, you need to know what you have misunderstandings about, right? You need to work out those, make sure we're arguing over the same thing. And I think having some straight up science to level set, we have this common operational understanding about what's going on around us. So I really do appreciate having these two gentlemen be able to present to us. So Edmund Cito, you're going to be the one to lead our discussion. And but Dr. Larson's here as well to answer all the harder questions.
Slideshow, right? Yeah, I've got it. Okay.
Thanks. So thank you all. I'm Edmund Cito, University of Washington, and I'll be presenting a progress report on our Ultrafine airport study. And I know that recognize many familiar faces from the last time we presented in November at the Highline Forum. You might recognize some of these slides. I also don't recognize some of you, so for some of you this will be new material, and so there's some introductory material. Hopefully this will get you up to speed quickly. Last summer, University of Washington received a proviso to assist the state in conducting a monitoring study of ultrafine particles around communities that are near Sea-Tac Airport. The assessment was specifically for looking at ultrafine particle matter. I'll describe what that is and what we know about ultrafine particles. We were given an area to look at. It's a rather large area, 10 miles north and south of the airport. And specifically looking at where the flight paths are and trying to sample underneath those flight paths. We're given 2 years to do this, and so ultimately our goal is to produce a report that documents our findings by December of a year from now. And we're also tasked with keeping everyone informed. And so we hope to continue to have ongoing presentations with the Highline Forum to keep everyone apprised of our progress. And as we come up with preliminary results, we hope to show those preliminary results to all of you and get feedback. So here's a bit of an outline, 4 bullet points. As I mentioned earlier, for those of you who haven't heard a bit about our introductory material on ultrafine particles, I'll go through that again. I'll talk about some of the previous airport studies. You know, we're not the first community to be looking at ultrafine particles. There have been other studies in the U.S., and there's a compiled list that my co-PI, Tim Larson, has pulled together from the literature, which we'll find to be quite interesting. And then the last time we presented at the Highline Forum, we didn't have our methods vetted by our study advisory board. Our study advisory board met in January, and so they've commented on our study methods, and I also wanted to present those to the public and also to the Highline Forum members to get your feedback and your input. So we'll talk about those methods today. And then finally, we've started doing some monitoring, and so I have one slide that basically talks about how many data points we've collected to date. Okay, so a bit of background. We're looking at ultrafine particles. Ultrafine particles are nanoparticles. That's another term for it. They're really small particles, less than 100 microns in size. 100 nanometers in size. Thank you. I know that Tim was going to correct me there. These are so small, typically they're not regulated. So regulated air pollutants are typically looking at coarse particles, for instance, particles that get up to 2.5 microns in size, or commonly you'll refer to that as PM 2.5. The other regulated pollutants are even larger, PM 10 microns in size. And so these are really tiny, smaller than the width of a human hair. And you know, we know a bit about what causes ultrafine particles to be in the air. Around this part of the U.S., there are a variety of different sources of ultrafines. Diesel exhaust on roadways is one of the major sources of ultrafines. It turns out that some of the newer gasoline direct injection automobiles, they also, there's studies that are finding that those are also a cause for a lot of ultrafines in the air. There's studies that have found aircraft exhaust also has ultrafines. And generally, you'll find that whenever you burn something, you're combusting some sort of a fuel, you'll generate ultrafine particles. The compositions may be quite different, and the sizes may be slightly different between these different sources. But you'll see here that you know, generally, when we think about particles, size is a really important thing to consider, both in terms of where it's coming from, but also its health effects too. This slide shows you a histogram of the different modes of particle sizes. And what's really important to understand is really small particles, there's many of them in the air. But they don't have a lot of mass to them. They don't weigh that much. And so we measure them very differently than we measure criteria air pollutants like PM 2.5 and PM 10. PM 2.5 and PM 10, you typically collect it and you weigh it because they're big particles and so they have some mass to them. But for ultrafine particles, usually what we do is we count them because the absolute number in the air tends to be much more important than the mass. There isn't much mass. And so this is the slide that, you know, I was referring to the SLIT review that my colleague Tim Larson conducted, looking at, you know, how much has there been in terms of scientific studies looking at ultrafine particles in airports. And this is, you can see, you know, years on the x-axis here, and it sort of emerges around, you know, the mid-2000s. And over the last few years, we've been seeing many more of these studies looking specifically at ultrafine particles in airport communities. Here's the list of the airports, the communities in which there have been studies, and you can see quite a few have been conducted in the U.S., places like LA, Boston, Rhode Island, Atlanta, and New York. Those are all really large airports. Some of the smaller airports as well, you see Oakland down in California and Santa Monica. Those airports have also had some studies done. But you also find a lot of international studies, so places like, you know, London Heathrow, you know, Tianjin, China, Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport. They've also found ultrafines in communities near the airport. So there's been a variety of different methods in which people have gone about measuring ultrafines. This is a study that Tim specifically was involved in down in LA, around LAX. And the way that they went about it was they instrumented a vehicle, 2 vehicles actually, and they crisscrossed driving on all the local streets. And you could see what they did was they looked at where the flight paths were, and they chose a crisscross pattern so that it would go underneath those flight paths. And you can see U.S. investigators from USC were involved, as well as some of the investigators from up here at UW. And what did they find? Well, what they found is every time, you know, they would cross a major intersection like a freeway, there'd be a big blip. And you can see that in terms of these blips, these episodic blips that you see on this chart here. But if you ignore those blips from the roadway traffic, there's this sort of meandering low minimum pollutant level. And what they ended up doing was they ignored the big blips, which are probably due to roadway traffic, and they just looked at this minimum meandering level across the drive. And what they ended up with was this map. This is a heat map showing, the darker it is, means the more particle numbers that they detected on their drive. And you could make out, this is directly along the flight paths for LAX airport. And more than that, it wasn't a nearby airport effect. These go out miles and miles away from the airport. And so because of this study and some of the other studies that I mentioned before, it's raised a lot of concern, not only in Seattle, but in many airport communities around the U.S. So, so the last time I presented at the Highline Forum in November, I actually went through a lot of the health effects. These are actual human studies, epidemiologic studies that have looked at ultrafine particles. So I decided to not review that. If you're interested in that, there are slides available from the last time we presented at the Highline Forum, and I'll show you a link to our website at the end if you're interested in that presentation. But the key takeaway point with all the health effect studies that have been done is there really hasn't been a whole lot of epi studies looking specifically at ultrafine from aircraft and airports. Okay. There have been a ton of studies that have looked at roadway-related ultrafines, diesel-related ultrafines, but we don't know a whole lot about the health effects associated with aircraft-specific ultrafines. And so I appreciated some of the comments that we heard earlier about the need for doing more of this work, both toxicology as well as epi. So in summary, some of this past literature shows us that, in fact, when researchers have gone out and looked around airports, especially busy airports, there tends to be high concentrations of ultrafines. We don't know a whole lot around Sea-Tac, and so that's the point of our study, is to go out and do some measurement. This methodology that we use down in LA with instrumenting vehicles, that seems to be an effective way of measuring it. And it seems to especially be a cost-effective way of doing the measurement, because some of the instruments that we use for measuring ultrafines are quite costly. So putting them in vehicles, crisscrossing a community, allows us to measure quickly. And then finally, as I mentioned, the health effects associated with ultrafine particles, it's largely limited to roadway traffic studies. Those studies generally are finding evidence suggestive of associations with cardiovascular effects, respiratory health effects, and even some effects with certain types of cancers. But not very much has been done with aircraft. We're aware of one study done down in LA. It's a very small study looking at asthmatic adults. And they've observed some evidence for inflammatory markers, so inflammation in the body showing up as a result of being exposed to aircraft-related ultrafines, as well as some reduction in lung function, so respiratory health effects. And those are associated with short-term exposures, so not chronic. They haven't really looked at chronic yet. So that gets me to some of the methods that we're proposing to use for the Sea-Tac study up here, and we're calling this MOVE-UP, and it stands for Mobile Observations of Ultrafine Particles. Mobile Observations of Ultrafine Particles is kind of a mouthful, so we've come up with the acronym MOVE-UP. And there's a process, and so some of the process involves working with stakeholders, and as I mentioned earlier, we formed a study advisory group, and this is made up of the port, the local air district, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, EPA, Department of Health, et cetera. Various stakeholders, government agencies who can help us with vetting the methodologies that we're going to be using for our study, as well as helping us interpret the findings. We're also hoping to meet regularly with the public. The Highline Forum is a good example of that, so that we can update you all on our progress. We've created a project website, and as I mentioned, I'll show you the link to that later, where we'll be posting presentations like our slides today, as well as our findings later on. We're going out and measuring ultrafines, and I'll show you some of the data that we've collected thus far and our progress to date, and we're working towards this report in a couple years. So that's our process. This is what a mobile monitoring platform looks like. We have a vehicle. This is one of our UW fleet vehicles, and Tim Gould, who's on our research team, he's in the audience. He operates this platform. And you can see it's a bunch of portable instruments that are powered by the vehicle. And we have a variety of different ultrafine particle counters. It's not just a single one, but we've got different ones that measure ultrafine slightly differently, as well as a black carbon monitor. And this is a list, a table of our instruments. And you could see, for ultrafine particle number in this upper table, we actually have 3 different instruments that we're using. We're also measuring black carbon. Black carbon might help us distinguish between roadway ultrafines versus aircraft-related ultrafines. Black carbon is typically associated with diesel vehicles. We're also measuring CO2, and that's a way of helping us maybe think about assigning, converting these pollutant measures into emissions inventories. Temperature, humidity, and then we've got a GPS tracker on our vehicle so that we can know where we're measuring. So we have a fairly detailed sampling strategy that goes along with using our platform. So we have 2 vehicles at our disposal right now for this study. And generally, we have a very simple goal, and it's basically, can we see an ultrafine footprint where we expect to see an ultrafine footprint? And that's mainly under the flight paths. And so if you think about the LAX study and what they found down there, are we going to see the same thing up here? And so in order to answer that question, we want to sample across many, many days, across many, all the seasons, high wind days, low wind days, different wind patterns. If the wind's blowing one way, we'll sample on both sides of the runway because it affects the landing patterns and takeoff patterns. And then we also want to compare our measurements with background sites. And so do we see anything different underneath the flight paths from places that are far away from the flight paths, background sites? So in designing our sampling, we looked at the flight paths, and this shouldn't be a surprise to many of you who are familiar with the noise levels and whatnot that are more palpable than air pollution. There's these distinct flight patterns, these pathways that are predominant for Sea-Tac. And we've been looking at them under the southerly wind conditions as well as the northerly wind conditions. And what we've ended up doing in looking at these is we've designed these driving paths, these transects, where we'll take our mobile monitoring vehicle and crisscross the community. And as you remember, the proviso says we need to do 10 miles north, 10 miles south. And so this is north of Sea-Tac. And so 10 miles south or north takes us all the way up into Beacon Hill. And so we've got a couple transects that cross Beacon Hill. We've got north and south of Boeing Field as well. And then we've got a few more that are closer to the end of the runways on Sea-Tac. So we sample as far down as 146th Street north of the airport. And then this is what our transects look like south of the airport. And so originally when we presented in January to the study advisory group, we had just 4 transects south of the airport. And then after some of the comments that we received from the study advisory board, we added an additional one. And so now we've got from 200th all the way down to 320th, and 320th is the Federal Way transect. So the other sort of major undertaking, I showed you the table of all the different instruments we're using. We're tasked with trying to tease out, what level of ultrafines are attributable to aircraft versus other sources. We have the roadways, we have the other types of combustion that happen in the area. And that involves looking at some of the statistics associated with the data from the different instruments. And so this is an example where we've tried doing something very similar to the LAX methodology, just looking at the ultrafine data and plotting it. This is just 1 day's worth of data that we did last winter in November. And you could see here that the wind is blowing north from the over the airport into the northern transects, and you can kind of see as we crisscross the 3 transects closest to the airport. It seems like there's some hot spots that we're picking up. This is very preliminary data. It's 1 day, one specific wind pattern. We've got a long way to go in terms of looking at more data and trying to make sense of it. So why are we looking at the statistics and trying to make sense of all these data from different instruments? Here's a slightly different way of looking at it. We parked our vehicle at 2 different sites. One site was close to the end of the runway at 138th and 16th. And then we parked it at a separate occasion up in downtown at the government monitoring site at 10th and Weller. It's right off the side of I-5, so it's picking up roadway traffic primarily. And what we observe when you look at the ultrafine particle sizes for these 2 different sites, they look different. So the one at the end of the runway looks like the blue distribution, a lot of very small particles. And the one off to the side of I-5, it has a more of a normal curve to it. It's more of the mid-range size ultrafines. And so we're looking at patterns like this to see whether or not there's an easy way to distinguish between aircraft versus roadway ultrafines. And so this is an example of the kind of analyses that we're starting to do. So this is kind of our progress to date. So we've started sampling in February, and we're continuing to sample. We've got 16 days so far, and on about half of those days, exactly half of those days, actually, we ran 2 cars simultaneously. So we're starting to pull in a lot of data. And the thing to keep in mind is these instruments, they update fairly frequently, so there's a lot of data points that we get, even on a single sampling day. We've got a quality assurance protocol where we're currently processing the data. Even for these 16 days, there's a lot to process and double check. And so as we clean up the data and process it through our algorithms, hopefully by our next meeting to the Highline Forum, we'll have some more results to show. And as I mentioned, we're still refining our methodology for really teasing out what are the aircraft-related ultrafines. Okay, so finally, here's this link that I mentioned to our project website, DEHOS, washington.edu, move _up. And I think if you just search Google on move _up, you'll find us. It's a hyphen, not underscore, sorry, hyphen. We're going to continue to meet with our study advisory group, and so probably we'll have a summer meeting with them, and then right after we meet with them, we'll have another public meeting to share with you what feedback we got from our study advisory group. As I mentioned, we're going to continue to monitor in the different seasons, and so April and May, we're going to be out there again, or Tim and Dave are going to be out there again. So don't be surprised if you see one of our UW vehicles in your neighborhood. And And as always, we're open to feedback at this meeting as well as via email. So don't be shy about sending us your comments and advice on how to do this better. And again, our goal is to keep you all informed and produce a good report by December of 2019. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cito. Do we have any questions from the Highline members? Yes.
Thank you. I saw in your presentation a discussion about direct injection gasoline engines potentially creating fine particulate matter. Are you able to differentiate that type of a fine particulate matter with jet fuel particulate matter?
Yeah, so we're not really sure yet. I mean, what we're doing now is we're looking at our data to try and figure out under which circumstance we're seeing.
Yeah, we're not entirely sure yet. I'll invite my colleague Tim to correct anything wrong that I'm saying here. But one of the ways that we're going about this is we're really looking at the patterns of ultrafines as well as other pollutants that we're measuring as we're doing our drive. And you know, if we're driving along a busy roadway with a lot of truck traffic and we're seeing a particular kind of ultrafine pattern, that will be the telltale sign of, you know, a lot of freeway traffic, truck traffic, diesel. And if we're driving around small local streets where you don't have a lot of traffic whatsoever, and we're measuring a background level of ultrafines that are directly under the flight path, I mean, that may be another way to distinguish. So I think, you know, there's going to be these conditions that we're going to be comparing across.
And I just want to say that there's been so much discussion and narrative about the uniqueness of jet fuel particulate matter and the impacts, you know, directly related to Sea-Tac Airport. So when this direct injection gas now is responsible for fine particulates, that seems to be a pretty different narrative that I've heard before. I hope we can distinguish between those two.
Also, I do know that there is, you know, plans afoot for those engines to have, instead of a diesel particle filter, gasoline particle filter like you have on heavy-duty engines. That's been proposed as a way to mitigate that on those vehicles.
Are you just quick follow, are you able to, you're not getting real-time indications of what you're picking up, right? This is a post-analysis basis, so how would you know whether you had a truck or a car in front of you? You have GPS on your sensor, but you don't have video, right? So your ability to determine what your immediate exposure is how would you do that? You would be noting it on?
Yeah, so these are real-time continuous instruments. So, you know, we get readings, you know, in some cases, some of them are set to second by second. In other cases, they're set to do minute-wide scans.
So you're seeing a display. You're watching a display as you're going.
Well, they're being data logged, and we don't have video, but we certainly know the characteristics of, you know, very small local streets versus, you know, freeways and those kind of conditions.
We also are, you know, as Edmund had said, we're looking at ways of analyzing this data, and it turns out that some standard multivariate statistical procedures in this sort of size distribution data set are very powerful and can separate things, mixtures, using size as a tracer rather than composition.
Right, I think Lydia, you were next.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it. So my question really is maybe for you, Commissioner. After the study and the analysis is done by December 2019, then what are the next steps, or how are we going to use this information, and what is it going to be used for? Or if anybody can answer that question for me.
Well, we actually have several, you know, big analyses coming our way, you know, not limited to the SAMP, but, you know, including of, you know, so I'm sure any data that are available to us would be built into any modeling or impacts that we would have, projection growths and things like that. And so I don't know if that as an immediate, I mean, the purposes for doing this, I think, was somewhat of breaking some new ground. This sort of analysis wasn't done. There aren't much in the way of epidemiological studies with regards to this, so this is really beginning to make a contribution to the state of the knowledge and specifically to this area. I was actually just wondering real quick, is this methodology consistent with what went on in LA and elsewhere? Are we able to compare these results with the other airports?
Using the same types of monitors there and using, the data we just showed you there was the same data procedure.
So we'll get to know our relative
Actually,
impacts?
we developed some other alternate, which we think are better procedures to follow on from that.
This is phase one.
But the other thing is that we do, it isn't set in stone, but what was said in this proviso is, you know, can we find this footprint? And then if so, then there's a prospect of somebody doing, perhaps us, but a health-related study, exposure assessment study. But we didn't want to group that into this because we didn't even know, and we still don't quite know, whether we can define footprint. If you can't do that, what's the use of?
Right, so this is phase one.
Phase one.
Phase
Right,
one.
right. So,
Yeah.
all right, so on this side, Nancy.
Thank you for the effort, because as someone who's lived in Burien for a long time, it's good to know what's in the air, obviously. I spent about a decade of my career working with CDC on their environmental public health tracking network, and want to reiterate the comments made by Mr. Cater, I believe, I'm not sure that that's his last name, about the need for, and you just alluded to it, not only measuring what's happening in the environment, but then understanding the toxicology and the epidemiology aspects of it, that three-legged stool. And I mean, it relates to what Lydia just asked, and the need to kind of conceptualize that more holistic way of looking at this from the get-go. And I haven't sat at this table before, so I don't know if this group has had that conversation about how do we begin to outline the methodology and funding for those other pieces that are going to be critical to answer the questions we want answered as to whether what we're seeing in the environment is contributing to various health outcomes. Where do we have that conversation?
Well, there's obviously a lot of political and financial interest in continuing this analysis. And I'm also very interested to know how much can biofuels or sustainable aviation fuels contribute to the reduction of that. That is also an unknown, and if it does, at what proportion? And so if we're going to make those kind of investments, we want to know is this an effective way of addressing that?
Is it a role of the Highline Forum to advocate for these kinds of studies, whether it's in the legislature? Again, I haven't sat at this table before to completely understand what impact we might have to say this is critical. As you begin to develop an indication that there is a footprint, then we want to know why that matters.
I mean, to the degree there's a consensus among the group to do that, I would see the collective cloud of this group as being exactly the kind of thing that moves mountains. So I would agree. I guess jumping across, Peter, you've been waiting. I mean, Peter, you snuck in on me. I didn't see you. So, Mr. Kwan.
Thank you. So I'm actually on the advisory board also, and good study, great methodology. After we had our initial meeting, it occurred to a lot of folks in the public that a few slides back, you mentioned determining the differences between airplane, ultrafine versus other areas. And the conversation that took place in the public was that it would be very easy to actually analyze the particle that's captured in the filter medium to determine the composition of the ultrafine so that the composition can be identified specifically so we know if it contains lead or thorium or any other of the particulate matter. Then the differences between, near the freeway or in the neighborhoods versus near the airport, that could also be determined as well. So I know that currently that's not happening, and I know that phase 2 is possibly coming. I know there was some discussion of potentially including that as part of the study. So where are we? Can we move forward with analyzing the actual composition of the ultrafine particles and not just the quantity and the size?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the phasing comes into this, and also the precise wording of the proviso. So, you know, under the proviso, we're tasked with monitoring for ultrafines, and so that's why we're trying to define this footprint. Certainly, I mean, as we kind of get a better handle on, you know, where the levels might be highest of ultrafines, we within the university will be asking the same questions, you know, well, what is the composition, and, you know, what can we learn about it more? And even if it's not covered under the proviso, I think, you know, that's still a question that we're very interested in. So, but I think we have to kind of finish this first phase in terms of understanding where the hotspots are and where it would be most efficient to look for composition differences.
So the limitation is in the proviso itself. So currently, that's
the
where
proviso and I think the timing too. So what I wouldn't want to do is to immediately spend a huge expense of collecting samples, you know, across a 250 square kilometer area without knowing anything about hotspots and low spots. So I would want to know something about the footprint in order to do effective sampling, because the laboratory costs could be quite expensive for that.
Are we collecting samples, or is this just a pass-through? There's no retention of samples?
It's a pass-through. We're not collecting them.
When you're looking at particles that small, as we said earlier, there's not much mass, and so it becomes an extreme challenge by a factor of 1,000 below some classical detection limits used for PM 2.5. And so to look at some of these trace elements is going to have to be pushing the boundaries of science, I think. And we do know from multivariate analysis of these footprints in Los Angeles, with the traditional methods that use for PM 2.5, you just don't see any metals associated with this. But that doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that our techniques are not sensitive enough when we're applying it to a standard filter collector. So it goes beyond proviso and into the edges of analytical chemistry, I think. I think you'll find that to be true.
All right, so Michael.
My question is, are you able to differentiate at all between biofuel emissions and traditional fuel in terms of aircraft?
We haven't looked at that. We do know in general that biofuel, the more biofuel in your aircraft in laboratory studies or runway fixed sampling studies, the more biofuel you have in there, the less of these small particles are emitted, because there's less aromatic compounds in there that can form these small particles by thermal collapse. So the more straight change you have in there, it just takes too much time to form an aromatic and then form a particle. They're out the door. And so we do think, and in fact, as the literature shows, that there may be a win-win if you go to biofuels, because you may be reducing these emissions as well.
Brandon? Just slides up.
Is the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency on the advisory committee? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the panel? We'll take a couple of questions from the audience if there's some interest. All right, we'll take 4. Just want to step up, and you guys can order yourself. Oh, actually, we do have a. Okay, great, thank you. And you guys can stand up there, and you can stay right there.
Here?
Yeah, you've got your mic.
I have a financial question and a technical question for the 2 doctors. The technical side, can you put back the slide that shows the transects on the south, please? Sure. I'm Dave Berger, resident of Federal Way. Berger is the spelling of my last name. So I'll ask the.
north or south?
South, please. So I'm just curious, appreciate the fact that you have a transect at 320th, but it seems to me that in the north flow landings or south flow takeoffs, the lowest point in Federal Way is the north area, where the greatest concentration of residents are is south of 277. That seems like a fairly large gap. I would think you'd want to have a transect around 300th to catch the area where the aircraft are the lowest landing and the lowest taking off going out over our northwest part of Federal Way. Because by the time you get down to 320th, they're at a much higher elevation, either landing or taking off. So I'm curious, why did you not add a transect in that area? Or could you, if you have not yet finalized the transects?
Or maybe a better question is, what was the methodology you used to define the transects? And that would get you...
It's really a matter of logistics. You know, we've kind of figured out that we could do basically 2 rounds of this with a single vehicle in a single day before you start running out of time. And so, you know, the challenge is to kind of fit in the driving that we have within the day. So we could rearrange some of these transects to try and cover, like if the 300th is the better one than 320th, we can maybe shift that way.
Just a suggestion to look
Yeah.
at that a little more closely. Maybe you want to refine the location of the transect to get the greatest concentration of residents who are most impacted.
The other thing,
Look
you
at the
know,
flight. Just look at the flight paths, and you can see that.
Yeah. The other thing we tried to do is we tried to pick one right at the 10-mile distance at the very, and that ended up being roughly 320. And you'll notice that the 321 is much wider as well, because you know the earlier ones kind of bring us up against the water. We can't really go out over the water effectively. And so by going out to the very end and going wide, you know, our thinking was, you know, if we can still see it at that far away, then that also would be important to know.
Understand.
Yeah.
And it was a direction of the proviso that you go out 10 miles, right? So you needed to send... All right, we have to go to the next one, please.
Can I ask my other question?
Well, that's 2. All right, real quick.
I only asked one question. The other question was financial. Is, given the scope of your study and the level of effort that you've defined so far, is it fully funded? Will you be able to complete the work with the funding that you have in the existing proviso?
Yeah. Yes.
Excellent. Number 2? We're taking 4 total, so if you first guys that stood up, that's what we got.
Hi there. My name is Daniel. I'm from Representative Gregerson's office, 33rd District, and that's actually part of Sea-Tac. So I'm wondering, how do you, I may have missed this, maybe the biofuel question addressed this, but how do you distinguish between different ultrafine particles, for example, aircraft particles or diesel particles? And so with that, these particles in areas with less traffic, are these truly particles from aircrafts, or are they blowing over from like I-5 or something like that?
With the spatial patterns, you would expect.
Could you speak into the mic?
Yeah. It's a combination of the spatial footprints. If they're high around the freeway and they tail off, that's one indication, versus if they're in a footprint that you saw earlier, perhaps downwind of the airport, not near busy roads. That's another indication. The other powerful tool is size, and we can do that at various temporal resolution, and it seems to work very well.
Weren't you also saying the proportion, like the black carbon associated with that? And as
Yeah, we're
another
measuring
signal?
black carbon, and because it's essentially, and we know this from aircraft emission tests, if they're all really small, they don't have much mass, and so the ratio of the number of particles to the black carbon soot mass is very high in a jet exhaust, and it's much lower in a diesel exhaust because the particles are bigger, and it's simple geometry.
So that's a way to squeeze it out, and I think that's a large part of this study, is to be able to make sure we're confident of that. All right, number 3. Oh, that's 2 bites at the apple, JC. Was there somebody else that didn't ask already? I mean, JC, you're welcome to ask after these questions. It's not a problem. Okay, you're up.
So do you envision a way to commodify this testing gear? Like make it, a self-contained gizmo that we can have in each neighborhood, like with the noise monitors at some point? I'm just wondering how long it's going to be before you have a system in place. Or do you envision this kind of thing where you need to come back every couple of years? How are we going to measure progress if magically everyone comes together and somehow is able to lower pollution levels?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. These still are we don't make these instruments. We procure them. So they tend to be fairly expensive. So we only have a few sets, and so that's why we've designed it so that we drive with them, and that allows us to cover these neighborhoods relatively quickly.
I'm just wondering if anybody has given some thought, or if there are any plans to, make it a black box that you can, or is that just way too far?
That's probably way too far. People are developing them, but I think they're still not ready for the purposes of this study.
The other thing we mentioned earlier was we measure CO2 on a couple second resolution, and if you use that data in conjunction with your observations of the particles at different sizes, you can infer a fuel-based emission factor, which varies by upwards of a factor of 10 in the literature between engine exhaust, jet engine exhaust, and diesel exhaust. So one could imagine either doing that while you're in the transect mode, or you just sit underneath the airport and gather that data, or drive along the freeway and gather similar data from the cars. But that's why we added CO2, because it gives you something that is more timeless, if you will, the ratio of those two numbers. It has to do with how much emission intensity there is per unit of fuel burned, rather than what's the concentration in the air on this day.
I would also imagine if you just have a sensor in one place, the sample error is so much higher than having a moving so you're getting a better aggregate sense of exposure, whereas one place may be in like some sort of wind pocket or something.
Yeah, we appreciate that there's a lot of interest in covering all the different neighborhoods that we have residents who are concerned. So just I'll add to the timeless aspect that Tim mentioned. So when we end up with these fuel-based emissions inventories, it's a way of linking aircraft traffic to the pollutant measures, or at least emissions. And so if we understand how air traffic may be changing over time in our communities, we might have some way of modeling or inferring what that's doing to air pollution levels. So that's why these emissions factors can be quite useful.
All right, so there's your fourth question then. Okay, we're going to have to shut it down after that. And then, Jordan, you have a question, and we have to go on to emerging issues from the port and get you home before the sun sets.
Actually, it's two questions. On the vehicles, are they doing in a 24-hour cycle or only during daytime?
Only daytime right now, but certainly we heard from the study advisory group the need to consider doing evening hours, especially with a lot of the...
2:30 in the morning is pretty good.
We hear you.
And the other one was, I've been watching some of the YouTube videos from California and their studies, and like we're doing here. What's the difference between, they keep referring to vapors, and you're talking about ultrafine. Are they the same or different?
I'm actually not familiar with that particular kind of study that they're
Certainly
doing.
ultrafines are condensed material. They're particles. They're not vapors.
All right. So, Yarden, wrap it up.
Yeah, this is actually really a quick question. question or comment, I think, to this person who said here. So I don't know if you know anything about this, but there was a question that was asked here and was brought up about the next phase, like in terms of not just where the ultrafines are, but what effect they have on health. Isn't that one of the things that is potentially being looked at with the new study that would be financed by the proviso that the Sea-Tac was looking for? I don't know if that was one thing. And then also, I think the feds, the bill that the mayor mentioned, that Congressman Smith, I don't think it moved forward, but I think that also involved a potential study of those issues. I just wanted to.
I'll just say, I mean, when the time comes and they need information on, what communities are the important communities, what are the hot spots in order to kind of look for health effects or to look at exposures. I mean, I hope that our findings from this study will help inform that.
All right, Joe.
It's a nice segue into emerging issues because I was going to bring a discussion up of that. So at the appropriate time when you want to move into emerging
Let's
issues,
start
we'll
emerging.
go there.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate, look forward to
Thank you all.
a future update.
Thank you, and I appreciate the work that's going on there. So as Yarden has raised the question, there was a budget proviso approved by the legislature. $300,000 requires a match from the local jurisdictions of at least $300,000 in order to do that. So I was going to mention that as something that we need to put on the Highline Forum attention list to keep an eye on that, because I think we're going to want to do some report outs. We do expect that I believe it's Department of Commerce will be convening the group, but the cities will be asked to come up and pony up their share to make that study occur. To get to Yarden's specific question, the detailed science study of health impacts, the phase 2 that are being discussed here, I think is not going to happen there. The detailed study there needs a long-term time frame. The proviso, the budget proviso, is for a snapshot in time based on current issues, current effects, current activity levels, and sort of a look at the current health situation of the community. So one is more looking at the static, and the study I think that was referred to as phase 2 would be more dynamic study over time. So I do not see the two things together. I do see them as related.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't doubt that there are going to be more studies coming, and but I think this is really important groundwork. We're going to distinguish one particle from the other and where they fall hardest. So that should be giving us a ability to have a stratified sample to look at these more questions. And Yarden, is your thing down or is it still up? All right. So I guess at this point we can do a little bit of go around. If there are emerging issues, we need to apprise ourselves of each other.
I wouldn't say this is on the fanciful side. It's actually on the very practical side, but it's something I haven't heard anybody mention. That down the road, I think we need a layer put over the epidemiological study when it eventually occurs that takes a look at some of the geo work done on trees throughout the entire area, just to compare that to epidemiological analysis.
Oh, are you suggesting the health of the trees or the effect of trees on people?
The effect of trees on health. There's been work done already on that. That's available that you can look at online, but I think it would be an interesting layer.
Be like as a mitigating issue.
I got nothing to report.
I'm shocked. But at any rate, kind of following up Mark's comment, a couple of things are happening in Des Moines right now of significance. So we're working on the 509 Gateway, looking at local match and working with WashDOT. And also the light rail, they're doing right-of-way acquisition, Sound Transit for the extension of the light rail all the way down to Federal Way, as the mayor mentioned. A couple of things we're doing that are interesting in this. We are taking advantage of some of the resources from the port to do work with Forterra and do an urban canopy master plan. And that's because the light rail is going to take out a number of trees. And we also, our city council passed a tree in lieu fee. So we'll have resources from Sound Transit and other developers that can fund the outcome of the urban canopy study. So we think from environmental stewardship, that's really positive steps for the city.
Okay, we have a mic over there, so great. You're good? Passing it along.
I just have a quick one regarding the light rail. So just a couple of days ago, I read about how Sound Transit is now going to build 2 stations at South Lake Union. And because of that, there will probably be less funding for other stations that will come in the future. I would really, really like to encourage everybody, learn from Sea-Tac's mistake, get a parking garage, get as many spots as you possibly can, because the Angle Lake parking garage, we have over 1,000 spots. You still can't park there at about 8 a.m. today. So when it comes, I think that negotiation needs to be made, and I think we need to make sure that South King County is well taken care of from that. So.
Sea-Tac success, not mistake.
Success. I would say success.
We got the garage.
We got the garage, but we could always use more spots. So I've seen the next stop is going to have like 500 spaces. It's not going to be enough. And Sound Transit always says, you know, they're going to move as they move further, it will alleviate the previous spaces. That never happened. Never ever happened. So I would encourage folks to take a look at that moving forward. That's all. Thanks.
And the port is interested in encouraging non-car use of the access to the airport. So you can, interested to hear what kind of letter you want to write.
We're trying to decide if we have something to say as an
sing
emerging
a duet?
issue.
First, I wanted to recognize your staff, Katie Halsey specifically, for her ongoing communication. She keeps us informed about issues, attends our meetings, and it's very much appreciated. So thank you for that.
It means a lot to me as well as to her to hear that. Thank you.
And Marco too, yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
I would say that, as some of you know, the city of Burien has been in front of the Ninth Circuit on a petition with the FAA regarding flights coming over the city of Burien, turboprop flights. And as of late, we've received information about jets taking off and coming over Burien as well. So we are anticipating a decision from the FAA based on that petition in the next couple of weeks. And once we work through those issues, we'll certainly come back and communicate that to the groups.
Was that an issue of failure of notification?
Failure to follow the environmental process for that change, which we were successful in the Ninth Circuit with that petition.
Right.
And we had over 750 comments that came through on this process that's been followed, and we're anticipating the report from the FAA in the coming weeks.
So it was a NEPA case, the failure to do the environmental analysis prior to changing the route.
That's correct. And it was the automatic turn as opposed to manually directed by the tower.
Thank you for that heads up. Are we good? All right, so Port of Seattle. Our new Lance Little. Claire will stand in most ably.
Claire Gallagher with the Port of Seattle. Lance is traveling this week and asked me to sit in for him. I know that you, Commissioner, wanted me to just update folks with regard to the Sustainable Airport Master Plan, and I'll touch base on that. Were there any other topics that had come forward? Katie, Marco, or Commissioner, just let me know. Commissioner, as you know, and several others, we briefed the Commission twice in February to bring you current with the planning and the activity on the Sustainable Airport Master Plan. We had not been in front of the Commission for over a year because we spent extensive amounts of time on airfield modeling of aircraft movement and the study of throughput or capacity on the airfield, and we had to do special modeling with the FAA expert from Washington, D.C., as well as use local meteorological data. And both of those things are unique to this plan. It's not what's consistently done in master plans. But Sea-Tac has special weather, and the air traffic control tower said that we really needed to use their records rather than the national model, and based off of the standard weather data that's registered for the area. So it took an extra year, and we spent the time to do that. And as we reported out to you in February, we are promoting a phased approach to the master plan that we will go ahead and move forward to environmental, a set of near-term projects that can be constructed and funded within the existing conditions at the airport, meaning the airfield layout, the airspace, the terminal footprint, because we know that we can predict that. We have constraints to pursue a full build-out because we have three kinds of constraints, as we showed in our slides to you. We do have further airfield development, and by that I do not mean another runway. I want to be absolutely candid about that. We're talking about how aircraft circulate through the existing 3-runway system, the use of taxiways, sufficient area for what we would call hold positions, or basically parking spots for aircraft. So we need to move aircraft faster if we were to accommodate the future full forecast amount of activity, as well as how quickly planes come in or depart. So that would be the airspace component and the financial component. It's extremely expensive to construct at Sea-Tac, and when we looked at the full build out for 2034, it was not feasible to fund to that level. So we will be doing follow-on work to identify how we would address those constraints and the choices or trade-offs that the port would be presented. So that is all to come in the future. In the near term, we will move forward with a set of projects that address the current demand and demand up through about 2027. And the slides that we used with the commission are, I don't know if you want to send a link to the Highline forum. They're certainly available on the port's website. And so we will return to the Port Commission in early May. We hope to advance that discussion and show the final list of projects that would be moved forward to environmental and the recommended alternative for study. The environmental review, we hope to kick off scoping still in late second quarter, but that timing is not developed yet. So stand by, and we'll continue to keep you posted. And Commissioner, anything you want me to add to that?
No, I think that's great. I think we should make sure that the links to those briefings that we get at the commission meetings are very helpful and good information. And I think the ongoing updates we have, and we're going to make sure that the scoping is thorough, in-depth, many of opportunities to make sure that this is going to be framed appropriately.
With regard to scoping, I know that's of interest to many folks. Just want to clarify that the environmental review is a joint port FAA product. We will have meetings with the FAA beginning either, I think in April, because they understand that we'll look at this phased approach, and we need to design the scoping and the approach forward so that both agencies are in agreement. And so that's why I don't have more details right now. Those conversations have just begun, and we'll keep you posted. So at this point, we're still planning work. We'll be back in front of the commission probably on the May 8th meeting is the date that we're currently looking at.
The way in which we navigate this is very important to me, and I'm sure to you it would be really great if you didn't have multiple volumes to have to review. The goal to which we can have an integrated analysis. That's, so you can't suggest that we're just pointing fingers across the way, right? We all want to be able to stand up and account for, that's the goal. We have two separate agencies here, so I don't want to promise anything, but I just want to know that's what we're striving for.
Thanks for that update, Claire. And this relates somewhat to what Mayor Farrell said earlier about the work that PSRC is undertaking on the regional aviation capacity, which we in Burien recognized last year on our airport committee. We actually had a resolution that came to our city council that asked PSRC and the governor's office and the legislature to tell us who was doing regional aviation capacity planning, because it wasn't clear it was happening. And it also, 2034 wasn't very far away. 2027 is even closer. And I guess I'm just trying to get my head around 9 years of capacity and sort of hitting a wall. We have in this region, I mean, from economic development perspective and all the other impacts, that's a very, very short period of time to try to figure out what we're going to do with aviation capacity. So I just want to highlight, I haven't been in the executive committee discussions at PSRC. I know they're going to move ahead. I know FAA only gave them about $200,000, which isn't a lot of money to figure this out. But I guess I just want to sort of continue to emphasize that this is a huge issue of figuring out the multiple regional port authorities, regional airports, and whether there's any feasibility of, new siting. So I just want this to be in the backs of our minds, in the fronts of our minds, I guess, because it's only 9 years to that point where you think you will hit capacity.
And council member, just to confirm, we plan to a capacity number and a forecast number, and so what we know is that we can accommodate the demand at the level of service that is acceptable through that late 2027 time frame. After that, you see additional delay and lower levels of service. So it's a matter of, and what we need to understand is what would be the trade-offs or the differences if we were to affect that level of future delay. So it's not that those are open questions that the port needs to explore along with the FAA, and more to come on that.
And there's like all sorts of trade-offs about, if kept at a certain level and the planes keep coming, that the hours of the day, the shoulder hours might increase. And so there are all sorts of potential unanticipated impacts that we want to have all eyes on deck. So I just would like to thank you all for your participation. Joe, you anyway, see Joe. All right, we still have 2 more questions. I'm not leaving anywhere.
I'll be very quick. I would be remiss if I didn't state clearly on behalf of at least the 4 cities immediately neighboring and surrounding the airport, the promise and the commitment and the insistence on environmental review being cumulative, even if you do a phased development. We cannot go back to the past of chipping away at environmental impact and then not acknowledging the impacts that come from that. So we'll be working closely with you on that, I assure you.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, I know you do. I just wanted to make sure everybody here heard that. We are working hand in hand with the port on making sure that occurs that way. Thanks.
My question, is the environmental review being done under the auspice of either SEPA or NEPA?
Both.
Both? So it would follow the same, so the process is laid out in SEPA? Okay.
Right, the FAA has the federal NEPA process, and we're subject to the SEPA process, and sometimes they can be done concurrently.
Would this ultimately result in an EIS being issued?
You do the work. It could. It depends on where the level of impact in the work takes us. Yeah, you do the work, and and then you make the evaluation of what can be mitigated, what cannot be, and what level of severity and work needs to follow that.
Okay, thanks.
And I would suggest you would put that in your scoping comments to the degree that you think one way or the other. So if that covers all our bases here, a couple of very near future things. One is, I take it the next START meeting is on the 25th, and we're covering the roles and responsibilities based on the members. That's what the thing is going to be open to the public. There's a listserv online, and it's going to be at the Sea-Tac Conference Center. Our next meeting is a date that I'm not sure of, but the 23rd, and I'm volunteering the port to host, unless anybody has a strong hankering to do otherwise, or alternatively. And
We're going to bring back the January Highline Forum, the consultant who's doing the altitude analysis, who will come and complete that work, hopefully at the airport on May 23rd.
okay, so we hear that May 23rd at the airport, and we'll get the elevations back on the table. I think that's of interest to everybody. So, and we still have one more question, Brandon, unless that's a residual question. Well, again, thank you for the strong public turnout and all of your attention. Call the meeting adjourned. And the time is 4:31.
Good job.
Thank you. Well, keep it up. We'll definitely be in touch.